A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to the B2B Growth Show, a podcast dedicated to helping B2B executives achieve explosive growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. I'm James Carberry.
And I'm Jonathan Green.
Let's get into the show. Welcome back to a very special episode of B2B Growth. We are here today with Rex Biberston. Rex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, James.
So Rex, you are the co-author of Outbound Sales, Fluff, which is a book that I read in probably less than an hour. It was an extremely quick read and really, really good. You're also the co-founder of the Sales Developers. Tell us a little bit about the book and then also the company.
Yeah, Ryan Reisert, my co-author, and I came together, if you can believe it, over LinkedIn like true millennials. And we wrote a book in 45 days and published it without ever shaking hands. So we're the true modern generation. But the book is all about how to establish best practices for outbound sales at a very basic level, just the fundamentals that a lot of people have moved away from and forgotten because of technology, because of confusion about best practices. And we just brought it back to like, what's the simple math of sales? How does this all work? What are you forgetting? And it is a short read because we've both read a lot of sales books, Ryan much more so than I. He has a huge stack. But I always got bored. I was an English major and I got bored reading books, if you can believe it. And so we wrote the short guide to outbound selling, a pretty quick hit. And we loved being able to kind of pass it out as our business card, and people have enjoyed reading it. So we found that there was certainly some value to what we had to say about the topic.
Absolutely. And then that ended up leading into you guys building out the company, the Sales Developers?
Yeah. And the effort there was kind of from a very high level. We want to help to up-level the sales profession in general. So when you look at all the content that Ryan and I produce, our goal is always to help salespeople become better sellers, to become more human sellers, right? To improve those skills that are going to make them money and also help the people that they work with through their products and services. But from a practical, like, how do we fund that mission? How do we make it worth spending so much time sharing all of our knowledge for free online? We are working with B2B SaaS companies that are pre-venture, but are funded, and we're helping them to go to market. Within about 90 days, we build a whole program for them that makes them extremely scalable versus the standard method of kind of figuring things out as they go and then adding a bunch to the fire, and they realize they've scaled it without nailing it.
Love it. I love it. And so, Rex, I mentioned at the very top of the episode that this is an extremely special episode of B2B Growth, and not just because I like you a lot, but you're actually going to be coming on board as a third co-host of B2B Growth. You and I have been interacting, again, like true millennials, on LinkedIn for the last few months. I've been loving the content that you've been putting out. We've had calls, we've gone back and forth via emails. You've given us, tons of ideas for different things we can do. And I just thought, man, like, I would love to have this guy hosting the show. And so you agreed to it a few weeks ago, and you're going to be stepping into a co-host role. And so I'm extremely honored and excited to have you a part of the show. It has only been Jonathan and I for the last over 2 years now. And so to bring in someone else, I think is going to add an enormous amount of value to the show, and your perspective, your background in sales. I just think will allow a level of depth to the episodes that we just haven't had before. So thank you.
I could not be more excited, man. I remember it was over a year ago, sitting in my car listening to one of your episodes thinking, man, they've got some incredible guests and these people give some great takeaways. And I loved it. So going from there to meeting you online to becoming a co-host of the show is just, it's kind of a dream come true for somebody who just listened to you online.
I love it. I love it, man. So I wanted to, and we were going back and forth like, oh, do we just do an announcement episode, or do we actually turn this into a piece of content? And I think in true kind of B2B growth style, we always want to be adding value. And I think
sure.
you are going to add an enormous amount of value, but I wanted your first episode, to actually add value in and of itself.
Yep.
And so we are going to be talking about something that you are extremely passionate about, which is cold calling. And I've seen you talk about this on LinkedIn all the time, and you get an enormous amount of engagement on your stuff because this is just such a hot topic, right? You've got the social sellers saying cold calling's dead. And then you've got the old school cold call guy saying, well, you're stupid. Like, cold calling's not dead. It's working for me all the time. And then you sit over here in the middle because you look like a social seller. And you act like you are a social seller, but then you're also advocating for this thing that, most people in our kind of demographic would say is this archaic technique. So before we dive into kind of, we've got 3 specific takeaways that we're going to go over, but why is cold calling for you? Why is it a tactic or a strategy that you think so many people have kind of thrown out of their, I guess, like their go-to-market strategy? And then we're going to dive into those 3 specific takeaways.
I think there's 2 key reasons. One, because it's really hard, right? It's really hard. It's getting harder. There's more noise in the marketplace. So people don't want to do it because it's difficult. And that's discouraging. Obviously, like I totally get that. I've been there before. I was a new sales rep trying to learn how to cold call, and it is extremely difficult. Requires a great deal of knowledge and coaching and practice, especially practice. I think the second reason is people will make sweeping generalizations about topics like cold calling and say it's alive, it's dead, it's the best, it's the worst. We use such hyperbole that it's like, really, guys? Most things work sometimes for some people in some circumstances, and let's figure out who that applies to. I certainly don't advocate cold calling for everyone with every market and every given set of circumstances. But for me, the idea that something is dead just because it's not fun, it's not popular, it's not easy, I mean, it works for me. I generate tons of leads and qualified opportunities. I have in the past. Lots of my friends and people I've helped have done that, and it's kind of nonsense to think that any one thing is dead for all people in all circumstances.
I love it. So this first thing we're going to talk about, Rex, is the first 15 seconds of a cold call. You put an enormous amount of thoughtful consideration into this first 15 seconds because, in your opinion, the first 15 seconds is more important than any other part of the call. Can you talk to us about, is there a formula for making that first 15 seconds really effective?
Yeah, I think the first thing to remember is why it's so important is that it's the gateway to the rest of the conversation. It's the gateway to what you're asking for. I mean, it's the gateway to them caring about you at all, which in 15 seconds they can decide whether they do or they don't, right?
Yep.
There's a bunch of different strategies that I have tried, applied, failed at, succeeded at. One of my favorites that works in some circumstances for some people, again, putting that caveat out there, is something I learned from Connect and Sell, especially Chris Beal. They talk a lot about this kind of script that they put together where it's kind of a funny little intro. It's, I realize I'm an interruption. Do you have 27 seconds for me to explain why I called? Right? Yeah. That is one way of going about it. There are 2,000 others, right? My go-to strategy back in the day when I was working at InsideSales.com trying to figure this thing out for myself was, hey, this is Rex with InsideSales.com. I wanted to see if what we do for sales team efficiency can benefit your team. Did I catch you with 2 minutes? Right? So I didn't ask for 27 seconds. I gave a value prop ahead of time, sort of, and then I would break it down further if they gave me the 2 minutes. Whether you ask for time, whether you say, how are you doing? Man, there's so much debate over these inane little topics that you have to practice, you have to test, you have to try it. You can't just say it does or does not work. And that's the biggest thing I want people to understand about this first 15 seconds is that you must figure it out. You cannot just say what works without testing it.
And does that mean, you're doing 50 calls, 100 calls, 200 calls before you switch it up? I know the one thing I love about your approach is you're very systematic in your approach to this, in documenting like, okay, you're disciplined in saying, okay, I'm going to try this, and then I'm going to try this, and then I'm just going to look at the data. What are some best practices around like how much do you need to test of a certain variable before moving on to the next variable?
Yeah, and I'm sure I'll get some economist who will beat me up over my answer here. But for me, one, it's not about dials. It has nothing to do with the number of phone calls you place. It has a lot more to do with the conversation. So in terms of the conversations I'm having, I'll regularly check at about 10 conversations deep and say, okay, how far did I get? What was the general reaction? If I used a certain script and I feel like the value prop was strong, but I'm noticing that that's where they drop off, or they say, no, I'm good, or no, I'm not interested, consistently getting the same reply, I notice, okay, I need to start testing something new there. But I'd say by about 10, you have some, and we won't say statistically relevant data, but you've got data you can really kind of intuit, all right, this is working, this isn't working. And you can start to test. And if you notice your test goes worse, so you switch it back to the original and figure out what else you were doing wrong. Maybe it was your intonation, maybe it was your timing. It could be a whole bunch of different things.
Got it. Okay. So this other piece we're going to talk about, Rex, is kind of the way that you point the conversation. And there are two schools of thought here, two styles of kind of how to direct the conversation. Walk us through both of those styles.
Yeah. So the first is the quick go for the throat style, I like to call it. The idea is you're going to present your value proposition and as quickly as possible ask for the meeting. Right? You're asking for their time. You're saying something, and it's got to be something that is exciting to them, that hits on a key point that they're interested in. I mean, you can't just say, hey, we do this. I'd like to show you how that works. If you said, we show you a way to save millions of dollars, maybe that's big enough. Maybe that's exciting enough. But it's got to be something that really catches their interest. And then you immediately say, when do you have, I know I'm an interruption, or I know this is breaking up your day. When do you have 10 minutes? We can talk about that further. You can go straight for the appointment. And this is working for some and not working for others. I had a big debate on LinkedIn recently about how to do that correctly, about what to ask for. But I think, again, this merits testing. That's one style. The other style is one that I've been a huge fan of for a long time, but doesn't work in all situations for all people. And that is the much slower, open conversation route. Right?
Okay.
So asking more open-ended questions, trying to get them to give you more feedback, not for qualification purposes, but to drive interest and prove value right up front. Okay. So the idea of not just like throwing out this big pitch and asking them for time, but opening with a great value proposition, then asking open-ended questions, getting them to give you some information about themselves, kind of break down those walls, start to trust you a little bit more because you're proving that you know something about the topic. This doesn't work great, I would say, for very inexperienced sellers. It doesn't work great if you're trying to drive the maximum number of appointments, but it can work very well in driving the most value in the conversation up front. So those are the two different styles. You really have to figure out for your market and for yourself what's working.
Got it. Okay, Rex, this last thing, as we're talking about offline, you talked about, if you say it's not working, then you're just not doing it correctly. Can you talk to us about this idea?
Yeah, I've had all kinds of people tell me that cold calling doesn't work for them. And I'll say, well, how many calls did you make? Well, I spent a week on this thing. I probably made 100 calls. Like, well, there's your problem right off the bat. You made 100 calls. How many conversations do you have? Well, I don't know, like 5 or 6. Okay, then you are judging whether or not a strategy, a tactic is valuable to your business based on 5 or 6 conversations. First, let's talk about the people that you targeted in those conversations. Were they the right buyers? Did you have any previous knowledge about them? All kinds of things that they didn't do right to set it up in the beginning. And the most critical thing you can do is to talk to the right people in the right companies in what Ryan and I call your swim lane. If you're not doing that, you're not testing in a valid way. So volume is obviously a part of it as well. Like 5 or 6 conversations, does not make an accurate outcome. So you've got to do a higher volume. Are you testing the times of day you call? Are you getting stuck with gatekeepers? Do you have direct dial phone numbers? I mean, there's so many variables. And then there's the technology component where a lot of people say, it's just not worth the time. We ran the numbers We made projections based on a small amount of data, and we decided this just ultimately wasn't worth it for us. So we went back to whatever the other strategy was, generally cold emailing, unfortunately. So this idea of low volume, making these assumptions, then throwing those numbers up as if it was like, all right, for the next year, what are we going to get? Well, you can incrementally improve your cold calling, both skills, your message. Cold calling gives you that live feedback that you need to improve all of those things in a very short period of time, but you've got to use the right technology to get in front of it. So I use tools like Connect and Sell, tools like Outreach, things that increase dramatically the efficiency of my efforts so that I'm not spending time on the tedious activities. In fact, Ryan and I, we built this bucketing system. It's really Ryan's brainchild that helps you to figure out which leads to talk to when, how to focus on the right people. And bucket one is basically people you've never spoken with. So it's like a brand new list. And we have created for ourselves an efficiency where we send our leads to people, offshore, and they're actually calling to verify the numbers are correct. They are emailing to make sure the emails don't bounce. So we don't spend any time on activities that aren't highly leveraged. So, saying that it doesn't work because you did it the wrong way does not mean that it doesn't really work.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think to your point earlier, it's easy to say it didn't work because it's hard and it's not comfortable. Heck, I don't cold call because I'm just super uncomfortable with that kind of rejection all the time. And so, and I haven't taken the time to figure out, hey, is there something really compelling that I can say in those first 15 seconds that would actually make somebody want to take a call? And I don't think people think critically about the human psychology behind it and thinking about it from the perspective of how is this person on the other end of the phone receiving it? They just follow this standard playbook of, okay, well, we obviously want to tell them about our thing. So we're going to open up by telling them about about whatever it is we're selling. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, then we'll just stop doing it or, whatever. And so I think this idea of dissecting each piece of it, is the market right? Is the time we're calling right? Is the messaging good? Are, looking at the cold calling piece of the puzzle is really a puzzle and going, okay, can we move this piece here? What if we did this piece here? What if we did this here instead of that? Until you find something that works for you. And so clearly it's working because you're making it work for you. And you guys have grown the Sales Developers rapidly. And so I love that we talked about this. I don't know that we've maybe talked about cold calling hundreds of episodes ago. We haven't talked about it recently on the show at all. And I think
people don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, right. I think this is going to be enormously valuable for folks. So thank you so much, Rex. Dude, I am so stoked for you to be the new co-host of B2B Growth. And really excited for folks to continue to hear your wisdom long after this episode is over.
I appreciate it, man. Looking forward to it.
There are lots of ways to build a community, and we've chosen to build the B2B Growth community through this podcast. But because of the way podcasts work, it's really hard to engage with our listeners. And without engagement, it's tough to build a great community. So here's what we've decided to do. We're organizing small dinners across the country with our listeners and guests. No sales pitches, no agenda, just great conversations with like-minded people. We'll talk business, we'll talk family, we'll talk goals and dreams. We'll build friendships. So if you'd like to be a part of a B2B Growth dinner in a city near you, go to b2bgrowthdinners.com. That's b2bgrowthdinners.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.